that we want to use and the decoration that we use around the text. The decoration that we use around the text is what we call as the markup. So this markup is specific to a particular markup language. Like earlier we discussed about the hypertext markup language the content of your web documents. And all the browsers have the inherent rules to understand the markup used as part of an HTML document because HTML provides something called predefined markup. You cannot have your own markup. Whatever markup is already there as part of the HTML standard, only that markup has to be used by you people when designing the web pages. Is it not? When designing the web pages. So the point here is basically we are discussing about the markup languages. We similarly have some other markup languages like MathML for writing mathematical equations and formulae. So there are hundreds and thousands of markup languages invented by people for various purposes. Some are specific to particular domains, some are generic in nature, and some are used in only certain contexts. But not all of them became popular, of course. So for web designing, for web page designing, we almost always use HTML as a fallback markup language. There are other markup languages also. Now, how did they design these markup languages? What if in the coming days, in the coming years, you are compelled to design your own markup language? So designing your own markup language is a two-step procedure. First, you need to decide what markup elements you have to use, what attributes are permitted for each and every element, and more importantly, the semantics and meanings, the meaning of those particular elements. Is it not? You need to decide like a head, a body, H1, then P element, image element. You need to decide, you need to write down the markup elements that you require for your particular purpose, for your own custom purpose. And then you need to decide which attributes are meaningful for which of the elements. And once you chart out these things, you need to tell the software, that is browser or some other software that you are using, you need to tell the software about the semantics and meaning of each of these elements and attributes. Then either you or people who learn your markup language will be able to use that markup to design some sort of content, some files or pages or whatever it is. So creating a markup language is little bit easier. The only thing is that you need to convey the information to the rendering software, browser or some other software capable of displaying or showing up your particular information. So this design of the new markup languages can be done by using something called XML. So XML initially when it was formulated, it was basically used for creating new markup languages. It was used for creating new markup languages. There is another dimension for XML. Suppose you are having two applications, application 1 and then basically application 2. You designed two different applications as part of your software development. Maybe both applications are designed by the same team or maybe two different teams. And possibly one application might be designed using the Java language and the other application might have been designed using C++. Maybe, we don't know. Both of them could have been used, both of them could have been designed by the same language, by using the same language, or maybe different languages, like let us say Java and Python. So when applications are designed using different languages, using different environments and different contexts and by different groups of people, sometimes they need to basically communicate with each other, isn't it? So these applications need to talk to each other. They need to basically communicate with each other. When applications are meant for communicating with each other, we normally define something called an interface. We define something called as an interface. Two applications, two pieces of software or two different programs can communicate with each other via or through something called an interface. An interface provides a common mechanism of communication for both the communicating parties. In this case, two different applications. Now, this interface can be in multiple ways. The interface can provide a set of methods, and by invoking these methods, the applications can communicate with each other through parameters and return values, popularly known as APIs, application programming interfaces. Our interface can be a common data repository where, let us say, some kind of a database, and one application will store the data in the database. The other application will be able to read the data from the database. Databases are viewed for a long time, for almost 3 decades. Databases are viewed as an extremely useful way in which two applications can exchange data or other information. The only thing is that both applications must know how to read the data from the database and how to store the data into the database. So these databases are popularly the relational databases, though these times we are having unstructured databases or non-relational kind of databases, which we call as NoSQL databases. Okay, but most of the databases are relational databases heavily dependent on the usage of the structured query language. Provided the languages that you are using to write both these applications know how to read and parse and generate SQL, there is no problem in using something like a database as a middle ground. So database can be acting like a data source and as well as a data extraction point, I mean data destination for the applications. Okay, but then the programmers and more importantly, the languages that you are using must support the database interactions. So either within the language or they have to provide some external tools so that we know how to connect it to the database and how to communicate and read and write the data from the database. So not all languages have this sort of facility. And of course, the popular languages like Java, Python, and C++, they support the notion of what we call as a database programming. But then it becomes what we call an overhead. Another thing, another way of simply exchanging the data is by using simple text files. One application will put the data into a simple file. You write the data into a file. Almost all languages will allow you to interact with simple memory-based text files, isn't it? You know, .txt files or some other kind of file. So file basically is very simple to interact with. You just open the file or create a new file, write some data, and then later on you open the same file once again read off the data. So that would be a very simple procedure, isn't it? Rather than using databases, a file-based data exchange appears to be very simple. You just have the file and then put the file in a particular location where it can be accessed by the other needing parties. Okay, so there are plenty of file servers available which act like file repositories, and you have protocols also for FTP protocol to access the file or to download the file from a remote server. But the problem with files is not only the file data must be understandable by the communicating parties, they have to stick to some common formatting structures, isn't it? Like end of the line. End of the line may not be interpreted in the same way by all languages and more importantly by the underlying operating systems, isn't it? Some operating systems may use only line feed character, some may use carriage return, and some operating system like Windows will be using the combination of both line feed as well as the carriage return. So there are bound to be some differences for end of line characters, then field separators, then how to interpret empty lines in the file. So there is no common ground for all operating systems and for all languages to have files as a communication structure. Okay. And moreover, files are basically open sources of data. It would be almost impossible to put security restrictions on what we call as files. So nevertheless, it is an option that can be considered at times, sometimes. Now later on, people found that, or if applications are directly communicating with each other, maybe through network cables, or maybe through pipes or some other mechanism, or maybe by using distributed memory structures. In all the cases, there are bound to be problems because of the data type supported by the languages. Not all languages will support the same types of data, and even if they are supporting the same types of data, the memory requirements, the length, the number of bits used, the formatting may be different over here. One language may support large integers, some other language may support only a smaller range of integers. Some languages may differentiate between integers and real numbers. Some other languages may treat them as a singular unit, no difference between integers and floats. Then support for strings, support for booleans. So there are bound to be differences among the languages. So communicating the data directly through stored memory structures or distributed memory structures is also basically ruled out. It has been a perennial problem for a long, long time to arrange exchange of data between the applications. Of course, database-based exchange was and is always popular, of course. Then people found that there is another use of XML, not only to define new markup languages. XML can also be used to store and transport the data between the applications. You can basically store the data and exchange the data among these applications. So that is an extremely popular usage of what we call as XML. Of course, these days there is an alternative for the same thing, which is basically called JavaScript object notation or JSON, and people are also using a NoSQL databases. But then we will explore the use of XML along these lines, how to store the data and how to exchange the data. Of course, we don't try to design our own markup language in these sessions. Well, the point here is I write the data using the XML syntax, and this data can be generated by one application and it can be used by the other application. The only thing is that the languages must know how to generate the XML, and the languages must also know how to parse the XML. Just like in the case of databases, the languages must have inherent or external support for understanding the XML syntax. Okay, fortunately, all languages have built-in modules or built-in packages or built-in tools for XML parsing and XML generation. Even if the language is not having its own tool, it is possible to integrate an external tool into the language compiler, or maybe at compilation time or maybe at runtime. It is possible to integrate such tools and then take advantage of this XML. Okay, so far so far. So let us see what we can do with this XML. So I will just share some material here. Just XML is extensible markup language. It is primarily used for storing and transporting of the data, and it is, as we see later on, it is basically self-descriptive. And the virtues, of course, the virtues of XML, it is human readable, machine readable, often used for distributing data over the network. It simplifies the procedures of sharing of the data, then transportation, then it is alien to platform changes. That means it is usable on all operating systems. And of course, it increases what we call as data availability as well. And there are many standards of XML. There is something like asynchronous JavaScript and XML. There is just like we have HTML DOM, we also have XML DOM, and then we have a XML path language, then extensible style sheet language transformations. We will see one example of XSLT later on, so that we will see how to display XML file similar to an HTML file. Then for database access, we have a query language here, which is basically called as XQuery. We don't discuss that thing, but we will be definitely focusing on both the document type definition, that is DTD, as well as schema. We will have an extensive discussion regarding DTD and schema, and then there are plenty of other XML services as well. So one important thing is XML is independent of any software, any programming language, or any hardware platform. So it is independent of all these things. And when you look at XML document, or when we design our own XML documents, you will notice that here also we use the angle brackets to enclose something called as tags. To enclose something called as tags. Okay, so just like that. So just like that, somebody raised a hand by mistake. Okay. So uh, without knowing anything about XML, just let us try to design our own XML document. I'll just remove these things here. So I opened a new file. So let us try to design one XML document here. Okay. Uh, say I'm designing my own XML document, and let us say I'm using one element called as time. The first thing you have to remember is, unlike HTML, where most of the time we spend to learn the predefined tags, isn't it? Once you understand and learn the predefined tags, then you start basically using them. You can't invent anything on your own. But XML is an empty standard. That means it doesn't have anything that is predefined, except for a few syntactical rules and something called a prologue, and then some structural information regarding namespaces. Most of the XML is empty. That means there are no predefined tags. There is no one to say that you have to do the things only this way or that way. Or other words, we will be inventing our own tags. We will be inventing our own tags. You are free to use any tag you want, with one exception, but you are free to use any sequence of characters as your tag name. So I'm creating my own element called as time. Called as time. You can use anything. Now, once I am using time, I want to create some nested elements in this time. So I will say hours. I'm using something called as hours, and then I'm using something called minutes. So we are using both opening tags as well as closing tags, just like HTML. The only difference is we are not having any predefined tags over here. So we are writing our own tags. So now that I have put some tags over here, I will put some information as a part of this tags. I'm saying 10 is the text for hours tag, then 45, and then basically something like 53 seconds. So I'm just defining my own tag, and I will just save this file in some location. Uh, and I'm just giving first dot XML. I'm giving the extension called as XML, first dot XML. So I have created my own what sequence of elements. There is a time element embedding the three more elements: hours, minutes, and seconds. All right. So we have saved the file already. Let us try to open the file in some browser. So when I try to open the file in some browser, so we are getting some information at the top. It simply says that this XML file does not appear to have any style information associated with it. That means it is saying that there is no attached XSLT, that is the extensible, that is sorry, XML style sheet language transformation. We have not yet used XML, this XSLT. We will do that later. But this is not an error. You can regard this as a reminder put up by the browser, and then you are getting the documented tree. So whatever I have typed in my file, the same thing is getting displayed, isn't it? Now you can see a button over here. If I click on it, the structure will be collapsed, and then one more click, it will be basically expanded. So this is what we call XML, a simple XML document. Now, Browser is displaying the tags as is. It is not interpreting the tags. Unlike HTML, if you put something in the p element, the tag is not displayed by the browser. The tag is used by the browser to interpret the meaning and purpose of the tag. Then it says that, all right, this is the p tag. I am going to display that as a paragraph. That means some sort of justification, and then it displays an empty line above and below that one. So it is going to use the tags for rendering purpose to decide how the content should be displayed on the screen, either using default rules or your own specified CSS. It will be using that information, the tag information, to render the data, to render the content. But here, the browser knows nothing about the elements that we are basically using, isn't it? I just defined my own tags, and you can't expect the browser to understand the meaning of your own tags. Not only you have to design or put up your own tags, you must also tell the browser how to interpret each of these tags, how to interpret the time, how to interpret the hours, how to interpret the minutes, and so on. So you have to give this information. Later on, we will see how to give this information to the browser, either by defining a DTD, document type definition, or something called XML schema, we will see. And then we will also see how to apply the transformations by using XSLT. Okay, so we will see this information, but just note that we have just used a very simple XML over here. Now, suppose this element, time element that I am using, over here is defining uh, a single point of time. It is defining a single point of a certain point of time. Okay, so 10 hours, 45 minutes, 53 seconds. If I'm having another point of time that I want to provide over here, I just repeat these things. I just repeat these things with a change of what we call as the hours value, and then the minutes value, and then possibly the seconds value. Because I want to describe two different points of time, I am repeating the same structure two times. Now let us see what happens if I try to refresh my page. Now what it is saying here, this page contains the following errors. It is saying that there are some errors over here. Error on line number 7 at column 1. It is saying line number 7 at column 1. Extra content at the end of the document. It is saying that at line number 7 you are having some extra content. Below is the rendering of the page up to the first error. So browsers are kind enough. They don't display errors, and it's not that they don't show anything. As far as possible, they show the information. What we can see is only the values of the first element or first occurrence of time, not the second occurrence. The point is, the structure of HTML and the structure of XML are almost identical. There should be something called a root element. There should be something called a root element. So right now, there is no root element because this particular structure, the one I am highlighting, and this particular structure are structurally adjacent to each other. They are at the same level. They are at the same level, and therefore it is complaining that there is no particular root element. Even though not in those words, it is actually looking for a root element, a singular enclosing element for all the other elements. So what I do is I simply put a root element over here, and then I close this particular root element, and then I just indent these things here for now. Let us say if I add the root element, whether it will keep my browser happy or not. So I'll just go back, refresh my page. Now the browser is happy. Now browser is able to show all my elements. I can collapse everything, or I can collapse the singular elements. I can do all kinds of clicking over here. So there should be something called as a root element. So just like HTML, here also there should be a root element, and there is no predefined root element. and then you can keep on nesting elements properly to any particular level. So I hope you understood how to design a simple XML. So let us go through the other things over here. So XML is information wrapped in tags. It does not do anything else on its own. You simply wrap the information like we have been doing in the example, but by itself XML will not do anything. We must use appropriate software and application either to send, receive, store, or display it. So we will see some softwares like some tools like XSLT, and then we will also discuss about the XML parsers and so on. So XML was basically designed to carry data with a focus on what data is. We are not concerned about the display procedures. We are concerned about the structuring of the data or the data itself, whereas HTML is mostly focused on the display of the data, isn't it? And as I told you, XML does not have any predefined tags. So tags are basically invented by the person who is writing the XML documents, the set of XML documents. So because of that, you have to define both the tags as well as the document structure. How to define the document structure, we will see in the coming classes with the discussion of DTD and schema. Okay. So as I told you, basically XML is a data stored in plain text. The virtues of XML, I have discussed about all these things over here. And XML is used in many aspects of web development. In the later part, when we discuss about server-side programming with servlets and JSPs, so we will see that XML is used over there as something called information conveyor to the server. So we will every server side application designed using Java, that means by means of servlets and JSPs, will be containing one component called web.xml. We will discuss those things, aspects of XML as used in the web development. And it is often used to separate data from what we call as a presentation. Just remember this phrase, separating data from presentation. When we go for XSLT, again, we will discuss what is the meaning of this phrase, separation of data from presentation. Okay, so, and just notice this point here, XML does not carry any information about how it is displayed. We are not doing that. Therefore, the same XML can be used in many different ways of presenting the data. So these are all basically virtues. When I distribute the notes, you can basically discuss about this one. So XML documents form a tree structure that starts at a root. And here also we use the terms like a parent, a child, and siblings. As I told you, an XML tree starts at a root, and then we decide about the child elements and further child elements and so on. So our primary focus will be on something called as the syntactical structures. So XML documents must contain one root element that is the parent of all other elements. That is the parent of all other elements. That is very important. Every XML document must and should have one particular root element. So if I don't use the root element, we will run into the kind of problem we have just now seen. That is the first rule. And at the top of the XML document, we can use something called XML Prolog, which provides the version of XML we are using. For the last 20 years, the version is 1.0 only. And what type of encoding we are using. Of course, UTF-8 is the common encoding for many programming languages and softwares and hardware these days. But still, if you want, you can just take this Prolog and then you can put it at the top of your document. You can just put the top of the document. Of course, it doesn't make any difference to you. Okay. So at the top of the XML document, optionally, you can have this something called XML Prolog. It is optional. Of course, it is optional. But if it is put in the file, it should be always what we call as the first line. Okay. That is second rule. Prolog, optional. But the first rule is there should be one root element. Then all XML elements must have a closing tag, including empty elements. Including the empty elements. Every element must have a closing tag, including what we call as empty elements. How to close empty elements? You can close the empty element something like this. Suppose Suppose you are having something like time zone. And if you don't want to have any data, then you can just put the opening tag and closing tag together. So there is no content between the opening tag and closing tag. Or else another way is I write the tag text. I write the tag text, then I give a space. I give a space. I will put the forward slash, and then I put the closing angle bracket. So this also indicates what we call as an empty element. So either you can write the end tag separately, or you can just take the slash and the closing angle bracket and put that at the end of the tag name with a space separator. So you can use either of them, but most people tend to use the second option. Okay, so that is how we write the empty elements. So in XML, all elements must have a closing tag, including the empty elements. And of course, XML tags are case sensitive. So uppercase is not equivalent to the lower case. And like in HTML, all elements must be properly nested. That means for the nested element, its opening and closing tag must be inside the opening and closing tag of the outer element. And XML elements can also have something called attributes. You can also have something called attributes. And attributes we always specify in something like a name value page. So we write the name and then we put the equal to and then we write the value, isn't it? That is how we write the attribute, just like in HTML. And attribute values must always be quoted. So you can use either single quotes or maybe double quotes. So single or double quotes, both of them are acceptable. Okay, so these are some simple rules. I'll come back and discuss about entities later on. What do we mean by entities? And if you want to put, you can put comments inside the XML. We use the same commenting notation that we have discussed in HTML. So you can write a comment of any length. There is no problem at all. And then unlike HTML, in XML, white space is preserved. In HTML, we have noticed that some white space collapsing happens. If I use extra lines or extra white space characters, they will be collapsed into one single white space character, but no such thing will be done in XML. So any amount of white space will be always preserved. So these are what we call as very simple rules that you must remember. So there must be a root element, and optionally we can put the prologue. Always remember to put the closing tag even for the empty elements. Then mind your uppercase and lowercase characters. HTML, you can write elements in uppercase or lowercase, doesn't matter. But here XML tags are case sensitive. And then properly nested elements. And then attribute values must be enclosed in single or double quotes. Okay. Now the core important point here is what we call as the XML itself. Elements itself. Or what? Later. Okay. So the most important component of XML is element itself, isn't it? So what is, elements? We have discussed that in HTML. So starting at the opening tag, then up to the closing tag, whatever we include in between, starting tag plus content plus closing tag is what we call as an element. So here also the same thing. It is everything from and including the elements start tag up to and including the elements end tag. And inside the content, as part of the content, you can simply have text, or you can have attributes in the opening tag, or you can have nested elements as part of the content itself. As I told you, an element with no content is called as an empty element, and this is how we write the empty elements, self-closing or separately writing the opening tag and the closing tag. And when you are inventing your own elements, like here, when you are inventing your own elements, you can almost use any name subjected to these rules. The element name or even the attribute name for that matter. Element name and attribute names must begin with a letter or underscore. Mostly we use letters only. And the element name cannot start with letters XML. XML as such doesn't have any reserved words or keywords, but you can assume XML lowercase or uppercase or mixed case. The letters X, M, and L, you can assume they are reserved. So your names should not start with what we call as the XML. So cannot start with letters XML. And then once it begins with a letter, the subsequent characters can be more number of letters. You can use the digits, you can use the hyphens, you can use the underscores, even you can use the dots. Though I suggest that you should avoid hyphens and dots because hyphens are used for subtraction. So if I say A hyphen B, sometimes some processing tools may misunderstand that you are subtracting B from A. And the dots we normally use for attribute references. We say object name dot some method name or property name. So some other softwares like JavaScript may misunderstand this dot notation. So it is better to stay away from hyphens and dots. And of course, the names cannot contain spaces. They are case sensitive. And one suggestion is you have to use the short names, simple names, and descriptive names. Yeah, as I told you, avoid hyphens, dots, and also what we call colons, because colons are used for something called namespaces. And then when you write the names, you can write the name completely in lowercase, completely in uppercase, or multiple words you can separate with the underscore character, or you can use the Pascal case where every word will begin with uppercase letter, or use the camel case where every word except the first word will start with uppercase, but the first word will begin with the lowercase. So these are some conventions. You stick to one convention while writing element names. Like in my examples, I mostly use what we call camel case. For my XML elements, I mostly use the camel case because JavaScript also supports the same camel case. And then, as I told you, elements can also have attributes like HTML, and attributes are designed to contain data related to, they always provide what we call additional data, and values must always be quoted. Of course, values must be always quoted. You can use single or double quotes. And uh, often an attribute can be replaced with an element. I will discuss about this thing later on because normally when you add attributes, we can replace the attribute with another element, or sometimes we can replace the element with an attribute. So unlike HTML, in XML, you can decide your own elements and your own attributes. Is it not right? So when writing the elements, when inventing your own elements, sometimes you have a choice whether to describe something as an attribute of an element or maybe as a separate element. So what will guide us to take a decision, we will discuss with examples later on. So this part we will see later on. And then coming to something called namespaces. Okay, so I'll just remove this complete example here and we will see some other example. Or let us say we will take the same standard example. I'm designing something called a table. I'm designing something called a table. Then I'm using something like a root. My root element, I'm calling it as basically a root only. And then I'm putting some element called a table. Okay, I'm putting some element called as the table. Now inside this table, I'm using the tr element, and then or I can use something like a row element because you may assume I'm using something like what you call HTML element. So I want a tabular structure, but I'm not using HTML. So similar to HTML, table tag, tr tag, dt, table data and table header, th and td. Here I'm using my own elements, table, row, data. Okay. And then I'm using something like name and I will close this particular data. Then I'm putting one more data element, and then I'm saying hide. So I'm just putting my own descriptions here. I'm putting my own descriptions over here, and then I will say slash row. So this is what we call as a table, right? A normal table where you can basically see that there is some information being provided. So we have a root element. Under the root element, I am having a table element. Inside the table, I am having two number of row elements. Inside each row, I am having the data element. So let us just go back and refresh the page. So this is how I'm getting the HTML display with my tables, rows, and then basically everything, isn't it? Now, this table is okay for us. We are visualizing structured information in the form of rows and columns. That is what we think about tables. But we can also have something like a piece of table that we are using to put articles on, the table that we are using, or the table that you might be using, a piece of furniture, which you are basically using, isn't it? So I am basically having some information regarding the furniture table. It has a brand, then it has a cost, then it has some other information as well. So I'm using the same name table to mean the stored structured information and also a piece of furniture, and the meaning in both the cases, in the first instance and in the second instance, the meaning is radically different with its own sub-elements, though semantics are basically totally different. Now, what if I try to display my page in the browser? So I'm getting the information right now about the first table as well as what we call as the second table. But some parsing software may not know the difference between the first table instance and the second table instance. It is a very common thing to happen. What is common thing to happen? The conflict. I am using the same name table. I'm using the same name table in the same XML document, but with varied meanings, with two different meanings, isn't it? Now, how to convey this information to the browser or maybe some other parsing software? So some other software has to know that here I'm referring to a structured information and here I'm referring to some furniture, isn't it? So, and also the sub-elements that are used over here and the sub-elements that I'm using in the second case are also totally different. So whenever we are using multiple XML pieces or multiple XML fragments or documents in the same application designed by different people, it may so happen that the same names may be used multiple times, more than once, with a different meanings, and this causes what we call a name conflict. There is a conflict of what we call as the names. Now, how to resolve the name conflicts? One way is we can ask all designers to use only some set of names. Not possible, isn't it? It is not. It is almost impossible to have what we call as universally divided names. Definitely, people will come up with the same names when designing two different XML documents or fragments. The only way we can resolve the differences is, or we can resolve the name conflicts is, by putting the names inside something called closed spaces. And these closed spaces are technically called as namespaces. At the bottom, I'm writing, see, these are basically technically called as namespaces. So a namespace is a grouping of names in a closed environment. So when I'm using the grouping of names in a closed environment in two different namespaces, the same names can be used. The same names can be used, but without any conflict over here, provided I'm using the namespace concept appropriate. Remember your package names. In Java, why you people use packages? Most of the time, not only to group the classes and interfaces, But packages are also a basic mechanism of resolving what we call as the name conflicts. If you have the same name used for two different classes, if they belong to two different packages, by using the package prefix, the names can be easily resolved. So java.lang.a is different from java.util.a. The name is same A, but one class belongs to java.lang package, other one belongs to java.util package. By using the prefix, we can always resolve those naming conflicts. The same thing can be done in the case of XML also. So XML namespaces provide a method to avoid element name conflicts. So we know that in XML, element names are defined by the author, and this may result in a conflict when we are trying to mix XML documents from different sources. Okay. So if different XML fragments are put together, there might be, we cannot guarantee, there might be a conflict if both use the same element name, but with a different meaning and different content. So either the user or XML application may not be able to handle these differences. So one way of resolving the differences is by using what we call a name prefix, by using something called a name prefix. So we use a unique prefix for every element in the same logical group. So what we do here is I put something like a colon for all the elements over here. I am putting a colon for all the elements, including what we call as the closing tags. Okay, so I'm just putting the same prefix over here for all the elements, and this resolves the naming conflict to some extent. So I'm saying that all these elements that I'm using here, that row element, the data element, and this table element, they belong to some namespace called as A. They belong to some namespace called as A. And then the other instance, I am saying that they belong to a namespace called as B. So you can use whatever names you want. I'm just choosing A and B for simplicity. You can use more meaningful names as well. So I'm just saying that all these names belong to a group called A, and these names belong to a group called as B. Okay, so this basically okay, prefix I have to define over here, of course. So I'm prefixing every element. I'm prefixing every element with some unique label, So name conflicts can be resolved using a name prefix, and then use a unique prefix for every element in the same logical group. Understood? Use a unique prefix for every element in the same logical group. So all these elements are in the same group. I'm using the same prefix. And all these elements are in some other group. Again, I'm using the same prefix over here. So prefix colon element and then slash prefix colon element. But that is not enough. That is not enough. When using a prefixes in XML, a namespace for the prefix must also be defined. That is why my brother is saying that namespace prefix is not defined. I have to complete that discussion. Okay. So when using prefixes, a namespace for the prefix must also be defined, and that can be done by using something called XML namespace attributes, XMLNS, that is XML namespace attributes. So this attribute must also be put in the following formats. We say XMLNS colon prefix and then some particular URI. So I'll go back to my page here. In the opening tag, I will put XML namespace equal to, I will put some URI. And in the other instance also, we have to say XML namespace is equal to some URI. Suppose I am saying here https colon two slashes sk.com slash, and here I am saying something like struct. And here I am putting another URI https colon two slashes sk.com slash something like furniture. So I'm using some URI over here, some URI over here, then I go back and display my page. Okay, XML, namespace, colon A, and here colon B. So now I am getting the information along with what we call as the namespaces. So we will discuss everything. So the point here is the namespace declaration should have the following syntax. We use XML NS. It is a predefined attribute. Then we put the colon symbol. Then the prefix that you are using, and then we point to a particular uniform resource identifier, that is URI. That is basically URI. So when I'm using this syntax, XML NS prefix and then some particular URI, see XML NS prefix and then some particular URI, what you are conveying here is that the information related to this particular namespace or this particular prefixed namespace is available in this particular document. You are saying that this document contains information about all these elements, row element, data element, or whatever elements. The information about the names of this namespace is found in this document, and the information about these names is found in the other documents. Of course, these documents are fake. These are not real documents. What you need is a unique URI, or it may be a real URI. The document may be really present. In real time, of course, the document will be really present, or else we can just use what we call as a fake URI. In this example, I'm just using some dummy URIs. Okay. So here, the advantage is that some software will be able to interpret this table element according to the meaning rendered in this document, and the same software will be able to interpret that now this table element is having a different meaning according to the definition put in this particular document. So by using these documents, by using these URIs, by using the information inside them, the parser or the software will be able to have a different understanding of the same name but used in two different contexts. So here table means structure, here table means furniture. That information can be conveyed to the parsing software or processing software by means of this particular document. So namespaces are basically very much advantageous. Okay, is that clear? So we'll be talking more about the namespaces and the other things in the tomorrow's session. So after discussion of the namespaces, then we go for a detailed discussion of DTDs and schemas. Any questions, people? No questions, we can start leaving the session.